The sun had set behind the walls of the arena. The king was pacing around the chair that he let Sir Frederick sit in. So if you have been paying attention, our friend Z is going to face Lu Bu. I know he surprised us before, but the sheer size difference... What do you suppose he could do to win? Asked the king, walking back and forth. I don't know. Hit him with his sword? Was all Jacob could come up with. Tire him out, keep him off balance, aim for gaps in his armor. But he didn't say any of that. I can't say, your majesty, said Sir Frederick. I suppose tiring him out would work, but his reach is so long, and there's no reason for the big man to chase him. Keeping distance won't work, and he has thrown opponents much larger than Z single-handedly, so closing distance won't work. He isn't quite as big as Hakon, but he may have the same weaknesses, though he hasn't displayed them. Your Eric sliced at his knees, if I remember. That sent him to his knees, but he appears to have solid stance and balance. Lu Bu is what would happen if you gave Sok another 2 feet of height, armor, and a brain. I don't see how Z could pull it off. Everything Sir Frederick said was true. Armor made you nearly invulnerable. Jacob responded, he could always look for gaps in the armor. That's what he always did, and it worked for him. Yes, and how simple is that? Asked the king. Sir Frederick turned his head behind the chair at the king. Difficult, your majesty. Edward Guevara came out, and this time he had drummers, and he was plucking away at his square lute. Z followed shortly behind, shaking his arms and legs, loosening them up, his 2-handed curved sword at his hip. The choir chanted an ancient tongue. The earth trembled. The cellos were played slow and deep, and the walking fortress Lu Bu emerged from the black hall, engulfed in shadow. His glaive had a swept-back blade, with a hook in the back. Torchbearers came and lit multiple hearths to light the arena, and the flames glinted off of his black armor. The hearths were at every corner of the ring, and every 10 feet apart along the walls where the spectators sat. When he stood across from his opponent, he made him look like a child. Lu Bu bowed, almost as a show of last respects. Begin! Lu Bu took short strides towards his opponent. Z held his sword in front of him with both hands. If I was him, what would I do? I already know my opponent, so I'd go for any perceived weaknesses. Z stepped forward, then ran under Lu Bu's arm, swiping his curved sword at the back of his knee. That did nothing. If it didn't work, what then? I could try to outrun him. Z stepped to the corner of the ring, and Lu Bu took slow strides towards him, his glaive in one hand. He stepped slightly to the left and held his glaive to his right. Z tried to run past the glaive, but it was too long. He couldn't find an opening. Lu Bu brought his glaive closer as the ring narrowed. Before long, Z was back to back with a roaring fire. What now? I could only... In a blink, Z was behind Lu Bu, in the center of the ring. What happened? Did he run that fast? Sir Frederick sat, mouth agape. He's... faster than we thought? Does that mean... this whole time? He was holding back, said the king. Lu Bu turned around and stepped towards his opponent. Once more, to a corner, and Z slipped out. It was easier to see the second time, but he was fast. He had made his body limp and fluid like when he fought Sir Frederick as he scurried around and under Lu Bu's reach. Then the next corner, then again, over and over. Even so, said Sir Frederick, he can't win like this. He's likely to tire faster than Lu Bu. Lu Bu has shown that he can pace himself, and even now. There is no rush. He is simply stalking his prey. If Z wants to win, he needs to hit him. He is hitting him, said Sir Jacob. See? Look at how Lu Bu's walking now. It's different. His knees are more flared out. Z has been striking between the gaps each time he slid by. Lu Bu needs to actually fight or he's going to lose. He what? He was striking the gaps? Yeah, see? He grabs his sword halfway up and jabs it behind the knee. Watch. But Lu Bu stood in the middle of the ring and didn't pursue. He put both hands on his glaive and ran at Z. He took a long slice, and Z ran up close, out of reach of the blade, and Lu Bu grabbed him by the throat. "Well, that's it," said the king. Lu Bu held Z high in the air, like he weighed no more than a feather. Z kicked and struggled, and managed to get his legs around Lu Bu's arm. Is he going to try that wrestling move again? But Lu Bu had another free hand, so he punched Z in the head over and over. Is the proctor sleeping? Why is this match still happening? Z's going to die at this rate. But Z held his sword up, gripping the blade, and stabbed Lu Bu's hand as he went to punch, right between the gaps in his gauntlet. The force of the punch was so great that Lu Bu cut his hand open on the blunted blade. He dropped Z to look at his hand. Z's face was covered in blood. The punches had cut him. He grabbed his sword the same way, with his offhand on the blade. Lu Bu let blood drip onto the ring and took his glaive in the other hand. Why didn't I think of this? He did the same thing against Sok. Lu Bu strode slowly, wobbly-kneed and blood pouring from his hand. He took a stab at Z, and Z rolled around it, blocking with his sword, and slid it the whole way up the shaft, stabbing Lu Bu's other hand. He hadn't managed to cut that one, but it made Lu Bu drop his weapon. Despite being disarmed, Lu Bu did not get angered like Sok had so easily. He picked his weapon back up and made his way towards Z. I am completely shocked, said Sir Frederick. I didn't think Z had a chance. He doesn't. Z began applying pressure on Lu Bu, sending strikes at him, poking in the gaps. Lu Bu couldn't grab him with his cut hand, and didn't want to sacrifice his weapon, so he stepped back, and back again, and again, and again, leaving a trail of blood, until he was at the very edge of the ring. Making the only sound he had the entire tournament, Lu Bu let out a massive "Hurr!" and with a kick, sent Z flying and rolling all the way to the other side of the ring, almost out of bounds. Z lied there, motionless. How could he kick him that far? The king exclaimed. The entire arena was silent. Z hobbled back to his feet, and a puddle of blood had pooled where his head was. The flames danced in the reflection of his sword as he lifted it up once more. It's a good thing that he blocked, said Jacob. What do you mean blocked? Asked Sir Frederick. He was sent... You saw it! Yeah. He put up his sword and braced himself. He would have a broken ribcage otherwise, though those cuts on his head from those punches don't look good. They're both bleeding. Yes, they're bleeding. We don't need them dying on us and causing a riot. The king walked to the top of the ladies' box, and a few moments later, Lady Alice spoke on her horn. Proctor, stop the match for now. We must stop them from bleeding, and then we can let them fight once more. The crowd booed at that. You know, they were probably both counting on the bleeding to help them win. Z can't take down Lu Bu by any normal means, and Lu Bu can't hit Z. He's too small of a target, said Jacob. So what are they going to do now? A band of wizards with blue robes came out from the dark hall and began dabbing and treating the wounds. They had to remove Lu Bu's gauntlet to wrap a white bandage around his hand. Z had a large white bandage wrapped around his forehead, and it quickly bled through, turning red. After the wizards had vacated the ring, Lady Alice shouted out, Begin! They took their time, measuring each other. Z ducked in, closing distance, and Lu Bu thrusted with his glaive. Z parried up, sliding the flat of the blade up the shaft, then sliding between Lu Bu's knees. He stabbed at the joint, then gave a kick to the back of his knee, the same one he used on Galvar's son, and Lu Bu fell to his knee. Z dashed in front of him and took a defensive stance. I see, said Sir Frederick. He doesn't want to grab him from behind. Lu Bu could fall on his back easier than Sok did, except he's wearing armor. Having that fall on top of you would be bad. But that wasn't his only option. Lu Bu is practically defenseless from the back. What is he afraid of? Why is he being cautious? Lu Bu swung his glaive right at Z, but a spinning kick landed heel first on the flat of the blade, knocking it out of Lu Bu's hand. Lu Bu is tiring. He's plenty strong enough to hold his glaive one-handed, and a kick from a man the size of Z shouldn't have been enough to disarm him. Z kicked at Lu Bu's head, but his leg was grabbed, and he was hanging upside down. Z used the back-swept curve of his sword to hook onto Lu Bu's armor, then kicked his hand with his free leg. Lu Bu's grip weakened, and Z landed on his feet. He kicked Lu Bu square in the head. Lu Bu reeled and fell to his back. Z jumped on top of him and held his sword in front of his opponent's face. The proctor raised his hand. A few riots broke out between a couple hundred people, but they were quickly quelled. Sir Frederick and the king said nothing. They only stared at the ring. Jacob didn't know what to say. Sir Simon was going to say something, probably, but he likely read the tone of the room and judged against it. The next match saw Steve Williams facing off against the Wyvern, Randall Cloud. Steve came out with a shield this time, but no weapon. Apparently he still intended on using his fists. Randall was a man of below average height, just barely. He wasn't skinny, but he wasn't huge either. His body shape was similar to Jacob's. He had hair that looked like sunlight, and eyes the color of the sky. He had a single pauldron on his lead arm, black and red, with the Wyvern sigil. He was carrying Mark Isaac's sword, which was not as big as his own, but would be impossible for a normal man to wield. Steve Williams grabbed a horn. I hear some people have been complaining that I'm not sportsmanlike. What a load of shit. Don't preach your morality to me. But I appreciate you, Randall. You're a man of few words, and I can respect that. And I also appreciate the fact that, hell, you can kiss my ass. The proctor walked over to him and started saying something. What the hell do you think you're doing? Are you trying to order me around? I'll tell you what, you don't order Steve Williams to do a damn thing. The only ordering that's going to be happening is I'm going to order some beers. He turned his attention to Randall. I know you don't care much for holding back, and I can tell you're compensating for someone with that big-ass sword. Now they tell me, this isn't legal, that's illegal. Well, I don't give a damn if it's legal or illegal. I'm gonna whip your ass. No, I don't know how good your hearing is, but if you don't understand what I'm saying, I got a little sign language for you. Steve then showed both of his middle fingers to Randall. Lady Alice didn't even officially start the match. They both just ran at each other. Steve blocked Randall's first swing, but then he feinted and swung low, hitting Steve right in the knee. His knee buckled underneath him, bending a way that a knee should never bend. The proctor raised his hand. Can we disqualify him now? Said the king, gesturing at the ring. All of the knights were silent. Some men came and carried Steve out of the ring. What am I saying? Of course I can. I'm the king. I'll award Z the woven crown, and it can be over. Lady Alice walked down the steps. My. What an exciting match. Did you see the way Steve Williams' knee broke in half? The final match will be exciting, too. There isn't going to be a final match. I'm disqualifying Randall Cloud. What? You can't do that. A riot will kill us all. The final match will happen after a brief intermission. If you wish to leave, Your Majesty, you may. I will station guards to protect us, but I must stay, of course. Jacob didn't understand why Lady Alice was giggling like that. It was almost like she enjoyed the terror of an angry mob. 100,000 angry fans tearing through everything. I will fix that, said the king. He walked up to the roof and spoke over the loud horn. Any and all rioters from henceforth shall be gelded in the name of the king. He walked back down. There. Now let's disqualify Randall. Very well, Your Majesty. Lady Alice climbed back up to the roof and spoke into the horn. Randall Cloud, of the Order of the Wyvern, has both killed a competitor and horrifically maimed another. Therefore, we have no choice but to disqualify him. The crowd erupted into boos. Rushing to the ring from the dark hall was Z, running by roaring fires, the red, blood-soaked bandage still on his head. He grabbed a horn from the proctor. Excuse me, my lady. If I may make a request, I still wish to fight Randall Cloud. With all due respect, he has not gotten to fight a skilled opponent. The crowd erupted into cheers. Does this fool wish to die? Said the king. He is badly injured from fighting Sok and Lu Bu. He deserves a woven crown. He's fought harder battles than anyone else. I must tell him that. The king walked to the roof and spoke into the horn. Z, hear and listen. You have fought better than any man today. You are more than deserving of the woven crown. I will bestow it unto you now. Thank you, your majesty, but I must know that I am the best here before I will accept the victory. I cannot accept the woven crown under these circumstances. The king was silent for a moment. But we must disqualify Randall Cloud. I understand, but I must still fight again before I will take the woven crown. Sir Jacob opened the gate and walked down the steps of the ring. A page ran and gave him a blunted sword. The crowd erupted into cheers. Some chanting even began. Knight of Night! Knight of Night! He smiled at Z, and Z smirked back. It looks like you have an opponent. Randall Cloud is disqualified. The crowd booed the loudest they had the entire day. Hello, I'm Jacob. It is a pleasure to meet you, Jacob. He paused and looked at the crowd, who were booing and chanting, Knight of Night! Which were both getting louder, especially the booing. Would you happen to be Sir Jacob, the Knight of Night who won the tournament last year? Yes, and the year before that, and the year before that. I see. In truth, I came to this tournament in hopes of fighting you. Then the riot started. Spectators came flooding over the wall, knocking over the hearths that lit the arena, lighting it on fire. Sir Jacob ran over and knocked over the hearths at every corner of the ring, sending hot coals tumbling across the field. It looks like you're going to be disappointed, said Jacob. I actually prefer a battle like this, but I usually have a sharper sword. I suppose we'll have to share. He put his hand on the hilt of his sword. The spectators were blocked off from entering the ring where Sir Jacob had dumped the burning coals, but there was still more than half of the ring by which to enter. They began running up the stairs and climbing up the short wall. The king shouted, Stop this now! In the name of the king! But they didn't stop. Knights! Guards! You have my judgment. Stop this riot at all costs. The king scurried down the steps into the safety of the ladies' box. Hundreds ran to the box, up the long flight of stairs, trying to get in, shaking the iron bars. I have to get to the king. Sir Jacob drew his sword eventide. The silvery hilt reflected the crimson flames, and the blade was black and silver-streaked. He began cutting down all who came after him, and in a few moments, bodies were piled up in front of him, and blood was pouring onto the ring. Z came up behind him and grabbed his sword and ran up the pile of bodies, jumping down to start cutting the rioters to bits. Sir Jacob took Z's blunted curved sword and beat rioters as he walked around the pile. Z threw his sword back, and Jacob caught it, slicing through 3 men. That is a very good sword, sir, Z shouted, as he kicked a rioter in the face. He took on his 8-limb stance and began pounding the rioters. Blood arced in the air as their heads snapped back, the red flying from their noses. But they were too many, and they grabbed Z's every limb. Sir Jacob cut Z out, slashing at the rioters, removing hands and arms. The king was still so far away, though. Let's get you to your king, sir, said Z. Jacob ran first, slicing back and forth, hacking rioters to ribbons, dodging flying fists, ducking and bobbing and weaving. Z was behind him, and one of the rioters had a sharp sword. Z elbowed his bicep and snapped his wrist, then cut him down. Remember, said Sir Jacob, they'll hit each other if you let them. And they did. And that may have been the point. A brick hit a man in the head as he challenged Jacob. Jacob kept his back to a hearth that had been knocked over. A simple dodge and trip sent many hurling into the flames. Soon, some who were chanting, Knight of Night! Knight of Night! began fighting the rioters. The fighting was spreading out, so Jacob rushed towards the ladies' box. There was a pile of bodies falling down the steps, and at the top there was a man with a sword sticking out of his back. He fell down the steps, and the king wiped blood off of his blade. Sir Frederick and Sir Simon came out in front of him, one on each side, and were deterring any more rioters from approaching. Jacob ran up the stairs, almost tripping on a body. Well, look at you, king. It's your majesty. And don't underestimate me. I was a knight too once, you know. Jacob did not know that. The chants continued behind him. Knight of Night! Knight of Night! And Z was down there, in the middle, fighting dozens of men at once. It was almost like he hadn't even fought that day at all. There was no indication of fatigue in the kicks he was throwing, the way he swung his blade, stabbing and slashing to kill. The king beckoned to Z. There was a gap in the crowd, and Z ran up the steps towards Sir Jacob. The king handed Z his sword. Its name is Conquest. It's not magical, but it's fine craftsmanship. Z took the blade, and the king turned his attention to the riot. Don't bother gelding them. Just kill all who fight. Arrest the rest. Put an end to this. Z smiled as he admired the sword. Its long and thin blade was pattern-welded, streaked and striped, with a golden crossguard and pommel which held a ruby. Sir Jacob, Sir Frederick, Sir Simon, 200 of the city guard, and Z fought for 2 hours. By the end of the night, 33,000 people were dead, and 5,000 were arrested. Welcome to the Storytime Saturday podcast. I am your host, TGD. This week, it gets pretty intense. This is the end of the tournament arc, and it doesn't go well. So let's start off writing wise. As far as the writing goes, the actual plotting, I should probably talk about it on occasion too. And it might have made more sense to have the final bout be Z versus Lu Bu and let Randall get disqualified first. Although, I guess it being this way kind of is sort of disappointing. Maybe the audience feels a bit disappointed as well. They wanted to see Z fight Randall. Like, the reader wants to see Z fight Randall. And the audience at Warren's place is feeling that same thing. Maybe that makes more sense that Randall gets disqualified when he does. I'm not sure. Let's talk about the characters a little bit. So, I'll start with Sir Jacob, who is the point of view character of this chapter. And we see in Z's fight with Lu Bu that everything Jacob says he would do if he were fighting, like he's thinking in his head, Z actually ends up doing. Jacob thinks, well, let's see, I would start off by going for the weak spot. And that's exactly what Z does. He goes, well, then I would try outrunning him. And that's exactly what Z does. He's able to perceive that Z's hitting Lu Bu's knees when he zips by him, when nobody else is able to see. No one else is able to tell what's going on. So we see Sir Jacob's powerful observational skills on display here. And he gets a pretty BA moment when he strides down to the ring. He's like, you know what, you want someone to fight? I'll fight you. So the entire reason that Sir Jacob didn't enter the tournament was because he didn't respect anyone. Sir Jacob didn't know of any fighters that he respected, that he wanted to fight again. So that's why he didn't enter in the first place. So this is a bit of a goosebumps moment. He's walking down the steps like, oh wow, he's fighting someone who he thinks is interesting. Sadly, we don't get to see how that fight would go. Let's talk about the king for a moment. We see the king is actually a big fan of Z, so going so far in the beginning as to call Z their friend. And of the king, we learn once more, we see his like typical personality, that he takes no crap. As soon as the riots break out, he waves his hand and says, kill them all. Anyone's rioting, kill him. You see anyone throwing something, kill him. And anyone who fights you, take him out. Take no prisoners. Well, prisoners that surrender, but if anyone tries to fight, take him out. Now, we actually have a lot to say about Z here. This Z really is shining in these chapters. First off, we put him over in a major way, because as soon as he zips behind Lu Bu and is about to, nothing personnel, kid, the king and his knights all immediately realize that Z's been holding back the entire tournament. That he hasn't been showcasing exactly how fast he actually is. So he uses half sorting, and I'm gonna just use this on my cutlass machete. He uses half sorting where he grabs the sword like this, so he has more control over the tip, and that's how he's stabbing into gaps in his armor. Now, I want to mention, I'm gonna get a little dangerous here. For those that are watching, Z's blade is probably a little more curved than my cutlass machete here, and it has a handle similar to like this katana. So it's not a very long blade. It's like 24 inches long probably, and has this long handle. Now it's more swept back than my katana machete. Probably even more swept back than the cutlass machete. It's some sort of like crazy. It's probably more like Middle Eastern and how curved it is. It's very curved. Maybe not that curved, but it might be scimitar like in how it's curved, and it has like this long katana like handle. And he's using half swording, and half swording was like the big thing. Half swording is incredible. If you saw someone half swording, you knew they watched like Matt Easton or Skalagram or something back in the day. So again, we see Z is put over again as incredibly durable. He takes multiple punches straight to the face from Lubu, who weighs... Lubu is like 7 feet tall. He probably weighs like 300 pounds. So he's a monster. And he has an armored fist, too. He has a gauntlet on, and he's punching Z in the head over and over again. Although, in truth, Z was probably blocking those punches with the hardest part of his head. Because really, a skull is a lot thicker than hand bones, than finger bones. So he might be blocking with the hardest parts of his head. He might be blocking with his forehead. Now, despite all this, that Z is a lot faster than he had displayed, and that he's super durable, despite all this, Jacob still perceives Z as losing. I don't know why I said that. It was like pretty clear that Z was dominating. But even then, Sir Jacob's like, yep, he's losing. But despite that, Z brutalizes Lubu. He has like this beatdown moment. Like if you ever played the Batman Arkham games where you go into beatdown mode and he's kicking him and punching him in the face. And and honestly, the king like stopping the match to have them patched up was only to Z's advantage. So yeah, Z wins that match decisively. And even after he's horribly battered, he still wants to fight this genetic freak Randall Cloud, who has won like every single match with one stroke, and is the only person to actually kill someone that day. He still wants to fight that guy. And after all that, Jacob notes that he's down there fighting dozens of people at once with this sword that he stole from someone, as though he hadn't fought at all that day, with no signs of fatigue. So Z is absolutely put over. Z's a monster in this chapter. And of note, we could point out that Lady Alice is completely bonkers. She's giddy and she loves violence, and the thought of being murdered by an angry mob is making her shake and making her giddy. So yeah, she's weird. So when these riots start, it's likely between the Wyverns and fans of Sir Jacob, or the Wyverns and Griffin agitators. The Wyverns are furious, obviously, that their man, Randall Cloud, has been disqualified, and they probably believe he should have won. And they're being angry that Sir Jacob is fighting instead. And the fact that they're mad about that is probably making Sir Jacob's fans angry. So there's tension in the entire... The fact that their hero, Sir Jacob, is getting booed is probably making the Sir Jacob fans very angry. So the Griffins see this, and they likely get a few shots in themselves and agitate to get a one-up on their rivals. There's any excuse to get into a brawl. And this riot scene at the end is quite horrific, where Sir Jacob and Z just start killing civilians. So that's supposed to be like, whoa, these guys... Because looking at this and reading it, you're like, okay, these guys are honorable. Like, Z is a very honorable guy. He's like, he wants to fight fair for the most part, and Sir Jacob is like very cordial, and even though he's not the smartest, he's respectful for as much as he can be. And then they start going ham on these civilians. You're supposed to go, whoa! Whoa, what's going on here? Of course, these rioters, these civilians are rioters, and they're trying to kill the king. But still, These guys killed 30,000 people, or rather 33,000 people died, which was probably most likely from people killing each other. And before you ask, this is before any contemporary famous riots of our time. This was written back in 2017. So this is not based on any contemporary riot in recent memory. This is based on the Nika riots, and this basically, what happens in the tournament follows exactly what happens in the Nika riots. Very similar things happen, rival factions with rising tensions. They start a riot, they're angry at their supreme ruler, and more than 30,000 people die. So, yeah, that's actually something that happened. There was a riot that broke out at an arena, and 30,000 people died in that riot. So that's pretty crazy. And you can look that up. There's good videos on it on YouTube. But that's it. That's the end of the tournament arc. And honestly, the best part of the book. The best part of the book is the tournament arc. It's really, really cool. And the most exciting to read, honestly. Even if the writing is not exactly on point, it's still really exciting to read. And it's fun to see what happens. So, I hope you enjoyed the tournament arc. The tournament arc is over. Of course, there is some follow-up to see what happens when Z is given the Woven Crown. But the fighting in the tournament is over, so I hope you enjoy the tournament arc here. Next week, we get a point of view chapter from Georgine. Georgine, of course, being the daughter of the king, the princess, the sister of Jeffrey and Gerald. This is the first time we see something from her perspective, so it'll be interesting. We've put her over as being incredibly intelligent, and like this beautiful, sly, snarky lady. So we'll get to see things from her perspective next week. So thanks for being here. Thanks for being here on the Storytime Saturday podcast. It's always a joy. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you make sure you're subscribed. If you're listening anywhere else, go to the YouTube channel _Chalice on YouTube, and make sure you like wherever you may be listening to this. So that's been the Storytime Saturday podcast. I'll see you next week.